friends. Hola amigos. Hoy vamos a leer Doña Flor por Pat Mora, ilustrado por Raúl Colón. Today we're going to read Doña Flor by Pat Mora and illustrated by Raúl Colón. Every winter morning when the sun opened one eye, Doña Flor grabbed a handful of snow from the top of a nearby mountain. "Brr," she said, rubbing the snow in her face to wake up. Long, long ago, when Flora was a baby, her mother sang to her in a voice sweet as river music. When Flora's mother sang to her corn plants, they grew tall as trees, and when she sang to her baby, her sweet flower, well, Flor grew and grew too. Some children laughed at her because she was different. "Mira, look, Bigfoot," they called her when she walked by. "Flor talks funny," they whispered, because Flor spoke to butterflies and grasshoppers. She spoke every language, even Rattler. But soon Flor's friends and neighbors asked her for help. Children late for school asked, "Por favor, Flor, could you give us a ride?" She took just one of her giant steps and she was at the school door. Of course, the escuela shook and the windows rattled. When Flor finally stopped growing, she built her own house, una casa, big as a mountain and open as a canyon. She scooped up a handful of dirt and made herself a valley for mixing clay, straw, and water. She added some estrellas. The stars made the adobe shine. When she worked, Flor sang, and birds came and built nests in her hair. Flor wanted everyone to feel at home in her house. "Mi casa es su casa," she said to the animals and the plants, so they know they were always welcome. Everyone called her Doña Flor because they respected her. One warm spring day, while a family of lizards swept her house, Doña Flor brought out her stacks of fresh tortillas. Nobody came. Thought Flor. She started knocking on doors and calling to her neighbors. "¿Qué pasa? What's the matter?" she asked, bending down to peer into the small doors to see where they were hiding. "El puma," they whispered. "The children have heard a huge mountain lion circling the village. Listen." Flor listened, and sure enough, she heard a terrible Doña Flor and her animal friends went out looking for the huge gato, but they couldn't find it. That night she carried her tired friends, the coyotes and rabbits, back home. But just as she started to tuck them in and read them a goodnight story, they all heard, "Where is that darn cat?" asked Flor. But the scared animals were shaking and shivering under their sheets. She gave them each a giant kiss. Mwah! Smack! The sound echoed and woke the grumpy wind, who stormed up and down the hills, a grumbling and a growling. That night the wind got so angry that he blew the trees and the houses first to the left and then to the right, again to the left and then to the right. Now Doña Flor liked her sleep, so she wasn't smiling when she heard the wind spinning around and around the village. Together the wind and the giant cat roared all night, and nobody got much sleep. As the sun rose, Flor's neighbors, shaking at the commotion, peered out of their windows. Tired-looking Flor was giving that wind a huge hug to quiet him down. Then she started on her morning chores. Doña Flor had to work, but first she looked around the village. Where were her neighbors? Then she heard, Flor stomped off to find that puma that was bothering her amigos. Exhausted by afternoon, Doña Flor still hadn't found that cat, so she sat outside the library for a rest. She was too big to fit inside, so she just reached in the window for books. You see, Flor was probably the fastest reader ever. Why, she could read the whole encyclopedia in 5 minutes. She liked to sit in the shade and read stories and poems nice and slow to the children and animals that climbed all over her soft body. Today she called and called, and finally the children came, but they were scared. "What can I do to cheer my friends up?" wondered Flor as she saw their frightened faces. She thought and thought. Now, Flor knew that her village needed un rio, a river. So to make her neighbors happy, Flor scratched a new riverbed with her thumb. When the water trickled down the stones for the first time, Flor called out, "Just listen to that. Isn't that the prettiest sound you've ever heard?" She smiled, and her smile was about as big as her tortillas. But today, her neighbors could barely smile back. They were too worried about the mountain lion, and sure enough, suddenly, there was a terrible "That's it," thought Doña Flor, and again she stomped off to look for the giant puma, but she couldn't find him. She went home to think and work in her garden. It was like a small forest on the edge of the pueblo, a tangle of poppies, morning glories, roses, luscious tomatoes, and chiles. Whatever she planted grew so fast you could hear the roots spreading at night. Her neighbors used the sunflowers as bright yellow umbrellas. She gave the school band her hollyhocks to use as trumpets. The music smelled like spring. "My plants grow that big because I sing to them like my mother did," Doña Flor told the children when they came 3 at a time to carry home an ear of corn. But today, the children ran home when they heard the sound rattled all the plates in the pueblo. Flor's neighbor's teeth started rattling too. "Where is that big monster gato?" Flor wondered. The smell of roses helped Flor think. So then she went inside and took a long hot bubble bath. Everyone knew Doña Flor was thinking when bubbles that smelled like roses began to rise from her chimney. "I know," thought Flor. "I'll go to my animal friends for help." She stomped off again, and she started asking because, remember, she spoke every language, even Rattler. "Go quietly to the tallest mesa," said the deer. "Vaya silenciosamente a la mesa más alta," hissed the snake. "Go quietly to the tallest mesa," whispered the rabbits. Knowing that animals are mighty smart, Doña Flor followed their advice. She walked very, very softly up the tallest mesa. She looked around carefully for the giant cat. Then right near her, she heard "Rawr, rawr." Flor jumped so high, she bumped into the sun and gave him a black eye. Flor looked around. All she saw was the back of a cute little puma. She watched him very quietly. Doña Flor began to tiptoe toward the puma when all of a sudden he roared into a long, hollow log. The sound became a huge "Rawr, rawr," that echoed down into the valley. Now the little puma thought that the loud noise was so funny that he rolled on his back and started laughing and laughing until he saw big Doña Flor. "Aha," thought Flor. "Are you the chico who's causing all this trouble?" she asked. The little puma tried to look very fierce. His eyes sizzled with angry sparks. He opened his mouth wide, and his teeth glinted. He roared his meanest roar. "Rawr, rawr," he growled. But without the log, the growl wasn't really very fierce. Doña Flor just smiled at the brave cat and said, "Why, you're just a kitten to me, Pumito." And she bent down and scratched that puma behind the ears, and she whispered to him in cat talk until the cat began to purr and purr. Pumito began to lick Flor's face with his wet tongue. Suddenly Flor heard a new noise. "Doña Flor, ¿dónde estás? Where are you?" called her worried neighbors. Even though they were frightened, they had all come holding hands looking for her. "Meet my new amigo," said Doña Flor, smiling at her thoughtful neighbors. That evening, Flor plucked the star the way she always did and plunked it on the tallest tree so that her friends in the pueblo could find their way home. She plucked una estrella to put above her door too. Even the stars could hear Doña Flor humming. Flor liked a fresh bed, so she reached up and filled her arms with clouds smelling of flowery breezes. She shaped the clouds into a soft, deep bed and into hills of puffy pillows. Said Flor as she snuggled in the clouds. "Tonight I'm very tired after my adventure with the giant cat, right, Pumito?" chuckled Doña Flor. All the animals snuggled down with her, and Pumito stretched out over her big toes. The end. Did you think that it was just going to be a little puma like this guy? Or did you think that it was going to be a big scary puma like the people of the town did? I loved Flor. I love how Doña Flor was a kind being, and instead of resorting to fear, she always met everyone with love. And so I think we can use her as an example in our lives to show kindness to one another, even if we're met with a challenge. Thanks for reading, y'all. We hope that you learned from this lovely story by Pat Mora about the dear friends that we can have when we treat each other with kindness. See you in the next video.